So when you live in Melbourne and you don't have a carport, your friend's gazebo comes in pretty handy. I'm going to take the opportunity today to do a couple of things. My Barkbusters on the right, the bar end has come loose. I think it was not using Loctite in the first place, but I need to get in there, probably detach the bars and tip them down so I can get the nuts out because they've fallen into the bars somewhere. But secondly, got my Rox Risers. I want to finally work out a way to attach them without straining the clutch cable. I've read online that there's a little bracket down in here that I could maybe remove to get enough play on the clutch cable for the risers to work. We'll see how we go. Standard socket wrench, 10mm on the Versys. Not too hard to take off these, but I reckon when I get the risers on, or even when I put these back on, I might get the Loctite on them. Pretty easy to come loose. The other thing I did the first time I did this, I don't know if you can see in there, it's a bit wet, but I've actually put markings on my bars so that I know where they were lined up. I just used a black permanent marker for that. Pretty handy thing to do before you get your bars off. Alright, so handlebar bracket is off, handlebars are now loose, so what I'm going to try and do is get the bar end pieces separated from the handlebar so I can tilt the bars and hopefully get whatever loose nut is out from wherever it's lodged in this bar assembly. Just want to try and show you why I'm doing this. So I've been hearing a rattle when, as you might know on a Versys, this thing loves to rev. When you're in the high revs, see if we can get it to move again. There's a nut. There you go, can you hear that? That is just loose in the handlebar and it rattles like crazy. So as you can see here, this is the often talked about issue with the Barkbuster. Fitment of the ends on the bars, there's like a sleeve that these bolts go into, and then a nut within the sleeve is like an expander, and if you hit enough rough stuff, that nut is coming loose. So this bolt has actually just been like this on my recent rides, and because nothing's attached to it anymore, there's stuff stuck in my handlebar. This third piece here, between my finger and my thumb, that is the piece that's loose from the other one inside my handlebar. So I might even need to loosen this part here. Unfortunately, the other thing I've noticed about Barkbusters is very easy to burr the heads on the bolts, so you have to be very careful with what I'm removing and what I'm leaving tight. Bit of a shame, but we'll see what we can do. This is the underside of the inner part of the Barkbuster bracket. As you can see here from the previous attempts, that's a bird head on the bolt, but this one I can get done, so I'll get it loose at least, give us a little bit of play so I can get into here and get the parts out. Okay, that was just enough to get the weights out. I'm gonna have to get in there and see what's left and what I can get to. Luckily I've got some replacement bolts and expanders from MX store, so worth going to them if you're having the same problem. That's the expander bracket, stuck right in there. I'm trying to get in there with screwdriver to try and get it loose. So first small victory, even if that nut is still loose in the bolt, that might be something I just make peace with now, but I've got the expander bracket loose enough to get it out of the handlebar, so I can put the replacement one in with some Loctite and keep it there. So I'll try a few more times to see if I can't get this nut out, but at least a slightly lower diameter green screwdriver. I think that's a square end screwdriver. That one seemed to just be thin enough and long enough to get in there, so it's probably a good idea to get this one off and replace it with a Loctite version as well, or one that's got Loctite on it. And in doing that, I wonder if I can't use some twine I've got upstairs and maybe a really small compressible cloth, long enough piece of string, feed it in from that end, try and get it all the way to this end before I then pull the cloth through, hopefully bringing the nut out with it. Don't ask me how, but I got it. That's kind of what I ended up fashioning out of some wire. The wire I picked up was some 1.25mm diameter gal, and yeah, it took me a bunch of attempts. I tried to stuff a cloth through. Basically, I couldn't get it all the way through the bars. There was just no way to get any bit of this wire through the bars. If you were trying to get it all the way through, I'd probably recommend using some thicker wire than what I used. I ended up having to kind of like double the strength by twisting it just to get it far enough in. Basically ended up double hooking the wire, and I think that was the key to getting it out. So I'll just show you how I was putting it in the bar. Basically, just getting it in there and then feeding it through till I could hear the rattle of the nut. And then I would just shake the bars a bit, move them around until I could try and get a grip on it. Then when I heard it rattling all the way with the wire, I pulled slowly, popped out, and I finally got it out. What I'm going to try and do is see if I can't undo this bracket here. This is apparently the bracket that frees up the clutch cable enough to put the risers on. So here it is from the bottom with the bracket loose, and I just had to get my hands up in here and pull it past each of the different cables, just like this. So if you keep it, it kind of comes loose in that position, and there's a gap between the two parts. You just pull it down kind of like that, and it passes by all the cables. So that's now the part removed, and the bolt and a pretty large kind of washer. Let's see if that's given us enough. I've given it a rough little test. I feel like it's giving me a few millimeters more, maybe in the clutch cable especially. So I'm going to leave the bars sitting like this, just up on the plastic, and fit these risers and see if I can't actually have enough room for the cable. So here's my Rox Risers, my OEM handlebar fastener, the OEM bolts. So I've put the thread lock on these bolts, just a little bit, used a cloth just to get it into the grooves, and got the risers in, but they're loose enough now. I'll just hand tighten those handlebar bolts. So these are loose enough just to get them into place. Just use your 10mm spanner, ring spanner, and it's going to fit anyway. So I can get these confidently in place, and then confidently do up all 4 of my handlebar bolts nice and tight. So this is definitely more promising than last time I tried. I had to almost manhandle the bars into place with the clutch cable just not giving me anything. This time it's relatively comfortable. I've basically, if you see from the top here, I've kind of biased them just slightly forwards. And you can see those black marks I was talking about on the top of my handlebars. That makes them roughly where they were central. If a little bit tilted backwards, so I might tilt them even further forwards in the brackets just to get it where it was relative to the brackets it was in before. And I might tighten this up and see how we go. So this is probably where I'd want the bars. The problem now is when I turn them to the right, as a lot of people have reported, I can actually feel the tension in the clutch cable, the clutch lever. So in its current position, that's probably going to replicate the same issues people have reported, where the clutch engages at a hard right turn. I'm going to see if I can make a compromise and tilt the risers, pivot them all the way forward so I still get some bar height. So I've now tilted these as far forward as I can. I'm still getting some hints of lever tension in the last few inches of turn. Okay, this could get a whole lot more interesting as a tips video, and what I'll try and do is reroute this clutch cable this side of the handlebars so it can come up through here, and that way give me way more clutch cable length. This will be probably the most complicated thing I've done so far. I'll give it a shot. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to have to detach the mirror, which is using these 2 nuts here. Okay, so the mirror's got a 14mm nut. It's important to note that there's a lock nut above it, which is actually a left-hand thread. It's used to keep the mirror in position, and you can loosen it to adjust the mirror's rotation, but you have to loosen it and give it enough room to then get the bottom nut off. There's kind of 2 threads, so the mirror goes into the bottom nut, and then the bottom nut goes into a thread here on the clutch assembly. Just a warning that as you're undoing this bolt, this nut will come undone. I found mine over on the ground over there. So just keep an eye on that. It's a different diameter nut as well, but okay, now I've got that nice and loose. Let's see if I can get this cable out. So I got the bolts out. What I'm realizing from watching a few other videos out there is I actually need to remove my Barkbuster. Handy that I've already got this undone, because I need to be able to push the lever all the way outwards. So we'll do that now. Gosh, this is just so much fun. I've now got my Barkbuster off, and of course, okay, so now I've got the controls assembly undone, I can finally get the clutch lever out. Okay, so it takes just a weird bit of twisting and turning and everything, and then you end up with the clutch cable loose. I'll be able to undo the lock nut and hopefully reroute it the other side of the bars as I needed to. So the other thing it's important to do is line up this little gap in both the lock nut and the tightener so you can get the clutch cable free. And it should just pop out. There is our clutch cable. So now it's a matter of poking it down, getting it through underneath here, getting it to pop out the other side. And there we go. It's now threaded this way. I'm just trying to work out if I think I go that side of the handlebar rather than through the front here. And I think we've just given ourselves a lot more play in our clutch lever. Now the lever obviously has to go this way around, so what you want to try and do is get it in at an angle where that gap in the lever matches up with the gap in the cable, and it pops the bobbin back into the lever here. A bit hard one-handed. There we go. So it's now in place. Now I've just got to thread the lever back into the bracket and do these bolts back up. Don't put the control assembly back together first, because you need to get into this bolt here, because it can tighten from the top, but you need it to tighten from the bottom as well, and you won't be able to get your ring spanner in there or your torque wrench or anything. Got our lever and our controls back in place. Time to get the mirror back on. I've gone with a slightly to the back of the bike tilt on the pivot risers because I'm tall. I want to be able to stand up and not lean too heavy over the bike, but really have some flexibility with where I'm standing, but I'm sure I'll adjust these as I go. So I'm going to tighten these. Just wanted to check I've got all of the parts in the right order. I'll get these back on in this order using the new bolts with some Loctite, and then hopefully that'll be done now too. Don't do up this bracket on the Barkbuster before you start trying to put all the pieces back in, because it's very hard to get them back inside the handlebar. You don't want to be putting this stuff in one little bit at a time, or you're going to end up with a lost nut inside the bars. So I've basically started to pre-assemble the whole assembly and then slide it into the bars. That one's now done up tightly in the bars. Okay, now I've refitted my quad lock assembly. I've put it just to the left of the risers, and you can see I've just angled the stem just one tick to the right, and then as a way to compensate, I've angled the bracket assembly for fitting onto the case one tick to the left. So that way it all lines up, but it just gets it a little bit closer to center. I've also tilted it a little bit further back so that when I'm standing I'll be able to look at the phone, because for the rally that we're preparing for, we're using roadbook apps. Okay, so I've just run it on the paddock stand in first gear, kind of one hand on the foot brake, one letting out the clutch, and it looks like the friction point's at the same point at which I had it after a little bit of adjusting. So now's the test, just to see if it doesn't engage the clutch when I turn sharp to right or left in the car park. So I think we are good. These feel solid. That feels like the perfect height. I can't believe I've been able to do it. Rerouting the clutch cable, coming down the side here and inside, all the mucking around to get that loose nut out of the bar ends, to refit with some thread lock our Barkbusters here, bit of mucking around with the clutch cable, a lot of stuff today. So Kawasaki, please just make these with a longer clutch cable. That'd be really nice. Thanks. So thanks for checking out my first video. Hopefully there'll be many more to come. I'll try and film some of the upcoming rally. If you aren't aware about it, check out Open Roads Rally if you're living in Victoria in Australia. It sounds like a pretty fun thing run by a really cool crew down here. There'll be a few more mods to make. I'm hoping to upgrade to a 10 700 in the coming months. So stay tuned and I'll try and share all the tricky little things with you from time to time.